Hey everyone, on this episode of Teeter Talks, I talked to the incredible, the remarkable, the amazing Dr. Robyne. Her and I met a few months ago, and I just cannot stop consuming her content. She's absolutely remarkable. She is a multi-award winning scholar, speaker, and author. She's an expert on all things resiliency and stress and well-being. She shares information in a way that's easy to digest, that you can understand, and that you can apply in your day-to-day in business and in life. We had an amazing conversation. We did not have enough time. She will be back for a part two. But in the meantime, everyone, please enjoy Dr. Robyne. Well, hello, Dr. Robyne.
Hello, I'm excited to spend time with you today.
I'm so happy you're here. I met you a few months ago and I could not stop thinking about you. I have been consuming as much as your content as possible. And there's just something so engaging and relatable about you when you speak. And I can't wait for all the listeners and the whole world to hear more of you. So I'm really excited for you to be today.
Oh my gosh, well, thank you for that very generous piece of feedback. And I'm excited to share and be here for this conversation.
So I want to talk about something, a major life event at yours. And I know when you
Yeah.
spoke, when you were on stage, just when I thought your talk could not get any better, you closed with this incredible story that I think really shaped you, who you are, and how you look at life today. But can you share a little bit? Let's go back. Something happened to you when you were 16 years old. Can you tell us a little bit about that moment?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for asking. So, when I do my talks and I'm sharing with groups and organizations, I usually start with my research. I talk about human resiliency and performance. And I usually close with sharing this particular story, which was very informative of
Mm.
how I started my work. And it's very much the origin story as to why I study human resiliency. And as you identified, when I was 16, I experienced a pretty catastrophic car accident. And what was quite interesting is leading up to that, there's a story behind the story. I was a young person who really struggled with school. I really struggled with mental health, emotional health. And like so many of us, I think we ask for help in all of the wrong ways.
Mm.
And so I was very, very off course. And my family loved me hard, but pretty helplessly. And I ended up being in this experience where at 16, new learner's permit, driving home, I got in a snowstorm and I wasn't very familiar with driving in the snow.
Mm.
And the vehicle ended up sliding off the road. It went down this embankment and it ends up crashing through the ice. And my vehicle sank in the Otonabee River
Mm.
with me trapped inside. And within moments, this frigid cold water comes rushing through the floorboards. I'm drowning entombed in my car. And it was so peculiar because I noticed I wasn't feeling afraid despite my circumstance. I was feeling really angry. And I was angry that I couldn't protect my mother from what was going to
Mm.
happen. And that was very much top of mind for me. So like I was thinking about what this would do to my mother, this experience. And when I thought about her, it very much was this feeling. My mother used to always tell me when I was a young girl that I could do hard things, and
Mm.
really instilled this confidence that Robyne can figure things out. And I ended up borrowing, so to speak, her
Yeah.
belief in me, and I was able to escape from the sinking vehicle. And that night, I was actually saved by a gentleman who was driving, just happened to be driving down that way, and he saw my car tracks in the snow. And Joseph Todd went down that road, ended up pulling over his pickup truck. He grabbed wood and a chain from the back of his truck, crawled out onto that ice using the wood to support his body weight, and ended up wrapping the chain around me and dragged me to shore. And Joseph Todd was actually awarded the Governor General's Award for Bravery for
Wow.
risking his life to save a stranger. And what was so interesting about that whole experience, when we think about resiliency, so often we think, oh, you've had this catastrophic event. There was this miracle in motion. You were saved. But the trajectory from those experiences, our comebacks and our recoveries aren't always linear.
Mm.
And so, yes, this was a pivotal moment that definitely changed the trajectory. But like all comebacks, it had a series of setbacks as well. But ultimately, that's what really challenged how I was living my life and put me on a new course.
I have goosebumps. You cannot see them probably through the screen or hear them, obviously, through this podcast. But there's something when you talk about thinking about your mother in that moment, and we'll talk
Yes.
about some advice you have for parents in terms of resiliency for their children. Um, It's an amazing story because when you talk and all the content you're putting out there, you already alluded to it. It's very much based in research. You have done an immense amount of research as an educational behaviorist, and we'll talk about what that means. But you also share all these real world practical nuggets that are so easy for people to digest and relate to. Now, hopefully, no one ever has to relate to this particular story, but it's amazing to hear that. And I love how you said that your trajectory was not linear after that, but it's amazing to hear that you were able to connect the dots, if you will,
Yes.
in terms of your life and your life choices and really ground it in an experience. Because I think being able to escape something like that says something about your ability to tap into resiliency and makes me really understand why you're fueled by this very topic. So tell us about the work you do as an educational behaviorist around resiliency and well-being.
Yes. So, well, thank you for that reflection. And yeah, it was so pivotal in understanding my purpose and my place and what I can contribute and how I can be of service. So it very much informed where, the next
Mm,
30 years of my life got to go. In terms of the work that I get to do now, I was in the academy for many, many years, teaching and doing research, which was a great experience. And despite that being the dream job, about 5 years ago, I realized that dream job was actually killing me. I
mm.
was so burned out. I felt that I missed a good decade of my children's childhood and I needed a change. And so I basically went for the second summit, that new career after the
Love it.
dream job, and built a body of work where I get to work with groups and organizations around the world talking about resiliency and well-being, whether that be through coaching, programming, keynoting, as well as authorship. And I'm very proud of the books that I've been able to put into the world that brings these concepts, as you described, in a really accessible way. So people can onboard to these practices that we know work because they are informed by the research, but they're everyday practices that
Mhm.
allow people to build success and build comebacks or whatever it is they need to build.
Yeah, very relatable, very digestible. When you're in a room with people, when you see the speaker up on stage and then you look around, you see a lot of heads nodding, a
Yeah.
lot of notes being taken. You really
Yeah.
know that they're onto something. So let's stick with the topic of resiliency
Yeah.
specifically. How would you describe resilience?
So for me and how I talk about resiliency, and I know folks talk about it as, your comeback or bounce back, something bad's happened and how do you rally? What I was able to see in my research in this field is that what people do in the ordinary time,
Mm.
what you do each and every day will allow you to be extraordinary when called upon. So their habits, their routines, there's rituals, their connections, their relationships that when you have built this foundation, you are able to withstand stressors and challenges and setbacks. And again, it's this everyday practice, which is why we called the theory everyday resiliency.
Yeah, and I would imagine as you're building that resiliency through your everyday life, that you actually are probably living a better life.
Yeah.
And not just in those moments where you need to tap into that resiliency, but it ultimately fuels a better life.
Absolutely. And what it does is I think it very much sends people this idea about having the confidence or the
Mm.
efficacy and overall that sense of feeling well resourced. So we identified in that theory there were five key pillars and we can talk a wee bit about them: belonging,
Yes, yes.
perspective, acceptance, hope, and humor. And what those elements allow people to do is to essentially braid these lifelines. So then that way when they do experience setback, whether it be a diagnosis, a loss of a job, grief, whatever it is that they're navigating, they have the resources to be able to draw upon and also the confidence that they're able to figure things out by their daily practices that we see people commit to each and every day.
So you said it, daily practices.
Mhm.
Can you give us a couple of your personal favorites or the ones that you see are most effective for people in terms of their day to day and building resiliency?
Yeah, I think the way to kind of sum it up as a grab and go idea, it's knowing how to make what matters most matter most.
Mm.
So if we're not intentional, I believe what happens, let's say, for example, in a business setting, that our clients, our teams, our groups, they get the best of us and our families get the rest of us.
Hmm.
Right? They get the leftovers. They don't get the person who's highly engaged and present and thoughtful and empathetic and considerate and a good problem solver. They get the depleted version. What I've noticed When somebody, though, goes through a challenge at work and all of a sudden something happens, whether it's a restructuring or any type of shift, if they've put all of their currency into their relationships in that occupational realm,
Mm.
it's going to impact them in a very different way if they have looked after their family system first and foremost. So if something happens at work, yes, it's upsetting, it's difficult, but as long as my home team's intact, we have this hedge of protection that we know we'll figure it out, we're going to rally, we're going to be able to find our way through this. But when our identity and our values get misplaced or misaligned, it makes it harder for us to be able to bounce back.
Yeah, that makes me think. You're not a fan, I think, of the term work life balance. And I am not either, because
Not at
balance
all.
actually implies two equal parts and it will never be equal. And if you're chasing that equal, I do 12 hours a day doing this and 12 hours, you'll never find it. I love the word harmony, and it's finding a way to make it all work together. You seem to like the word integration.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about the importance of that and maybe how people can find more harmony or integration as it relates to their work and their life.
Yeah, I love that question. I love that we're both on the same page on this one. So I think what's really important is that we have clarity, right? We need clarity of knowing, what matters most. And again, what do I need to do to ensure that I'm looking after those key areas within my life? So again, there's going to be seasons when, yeah, we have
Mhm.
to focus on work. That's how we create our livelihoods. It's how we build our lifestyles. Like there is a place for that, but we want to ensure that it's not coming at the cost
Right.
of our relationships. So again, having that clarity of recognizing where do I have to have my A game, who needs me today, and being able to build connections and collaborations and partnerships within the family system, whatever that system looks like, to be able to have the ability to say, for example, I said to my family this week, I have a really tight deadline for this book. I want to be present. I want to be a present parent, a good partner, and this is going to have to take the front seat for this period of time. And when that's done, we're going to then be able to do this thing or whatnot. So it's that exchange of that currency of time, of attention, of energy and focus. But to be able to do that, I think we need clarity of knowing where are we trying to get to? What are we trying to accomplish? And staying within our values.
Yeah, and communication seems to be a big part of it for you as well, too. I mean, clarifying it, relying on. I always say to people all the time, I mean, there's no trophy for going it alone,
No.
and absolutely, it takes a team, it takes a village, and absolutely, having success at work means having success at home to a certain degree, and vice versa. And understanding the role that everybody plays in that, and that you can't kind of carry the entire load by yourself. You certainly can't kind of plow through assuming everyone knows, for example, that this week you're really going to be focused on the book and that's your priority. It's really important to let people know where you're at. So not only do you have clarity, but everyone else around you does, and they can support accordingly.
Absolutely. And I think what's so important is that it has to go in both directions. So
Mm.
again, my children are older now. So I'm 20, my kids are 21, 19, and 17. So they're at a point now where we can have kind of these big conversations, which, pretty quickly. But even when they were growing up, being able to have those little check-ins and say, like, hey, what does your week look like? What are some of the things that are top of mind for you? And whether it be, oh, we have tryouts or, hey, we have this event coming up. It's like, great. So we have to ensure that this isn't just kind of one person centered. It's that mutual respect that so when that little one says, like, oh, I have this big test this week and I'm nervous about it, that we show up and we respect that
Yes.
experience for them. So they start to, again, understand that there's this exchange that happens in relationships and they are bi-directional, which I think is super important.
Yeah, and I want to stay on that topic too, because you alluded to this career shift
Mhm.
when you felt, you use the word burnout. We
Yeah.
often use the word stress, and a lot of people don't escape it. I mean, people live this day to day as if it's the norm. You talk a lot about reframing stress and this
Mhm.
idea of reframing it as energy rather than a threat. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions right now about stress and this notion of it, even here right now that people say, oh, it's killing us. And it is. It's associated with like 90% of diseases, all cause mortality, stress is being put in there. But I think where there's such a misconception is that stress is our first line of defense.
Mm,
Stress lets us know what is important. That hormone cortisol gives us energy, it gives us focus, it gives us drive. So, what's happening, I think, right now, it's the doses of stress that we're getting on a daily basis that's putting us into this place that we call distress. And that
mm.
isn't good or bad stress. Like our nervous system can't tell the
Right,
difference if it's like, we're being chased by a bear or it's a Teams notification, right? Like
right.
it can't tell the
They
difference.
both
All it
sound
knows.
terrifying. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, and I think sometimes of our notifications are actually like we treat them like fire alarms, where all of a sudden we have this quick reaction to
Mm,
this interruption. And again, our nervous system is designed to keep us safe. It wants us to know that we are okay. So when people say, I want to get rid of my stress, that's actually not even a reasonable goal because that's part of what lets us know that things are important or that maybe we need help or we need some recovery. So, my invitation is to help people recognize that stress serves a very important function. And when we work in alignment
mm.
with our biology, that's when we can become essentially unstoppable. It allows us, for example, in a very stressful environment where people are feeling very frantic, there's lots of urgency, people are kind of chasing their tail, so to speak. You can have this hedge of protection of calm where you're able to protect your peace. You're able to have guardrails in place to make sure that you are okay and you don't get caught up in all of that reactivity.
Yeah, you also talk about self-awareness, and I feel like this would be a good time because I think some people don't realize there's another way sometimes. I
Mhm.
think we've created a standard of our lives where it's just go, 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 nonstop, shoving food in your mouth while you're running out the door, eating in your car in the parking lot, running from one meeting to the next. And, people have different theories on why we got to where we are. But ultimately, some people just make this the new norm. And I do realize some people have more options than others. Certainly, it's a
Yeah.
privilege, I think, to be able to pause, pivot, quit, stop, change if you're in those scenarios. But it also requires a certain amount of self awareness to acknowledge that this stress has gone too far, that this is that I need to change. How do you connect those dots in terms of building self awareness? Because self awareness is one of those things sometimes that I think you either have it or you don't, but you
Mhm.
seem to think that you can maybe build it, which is good
Yeah.
news. So can you maybe
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it's just interesting. Actually, I just released an episode on my podcast about
Ooh,
the fours of the four dimensions. And we talk about these as the self awareness archetype.
okay.
So essentially, there's kind of four different kind of categories. The first one is we call the introspectors, which means that they're very aware of themselves, but they have very little awareness of the outside world.
Okay.
So they don't read the room per se, right? They're
Mm,
not picking up cues. They don't have anyone pointing out their blind spots. They're not really open to feedback. So they just kind of go on their way and are pretty confident in that. But unfortunately, it does come often at the cost of their wellness and their relationships if they're
right.
not open to feedback and knowing what's going on around them. And then on the other kind of low sense of awareness of self and low of outside factors, we call that the seekers, right? Like they're the person that's essentially like rudderless, right? They don't know themselves well enough to know where they fit. They aren't really open from receiving information from other people, and their self-awareness tends to be very, very low. And on the other side of that, we have this idea of high sense of self, of awareness and external, which we call that this idea of that just general aware. So this is a person that kind of sees the big picture. They're open to feedback. They have people in their world that'll point out some blind spots if they need to. And those are the people that can very much kind of stay on course. And not any person is in one category in every dimension of their life or every season of their life. There's a bit of an ebb and flow.
Mm,
And for me personally, where that awareness very much came from, I recall, and I think I might have shared this with you before at that event, is I came home from work again, another like 9 to 5. This is just what my life looked like. It was kind of rinse and repeat. And I came home and I was in a bit of a tizzy, bit of a mood just because it was another difficult day. And at the time, Hunter, who would have been about 15, my oldest, said to me, he's like, Mama, do you remember when I was little? And I hold space to love when the 15-year-old says, remember when I was little, right? Like he has this ancient wisdom, right? And I was like, yes, I remember when you were little. And he said, you
aw,
used to tell me that I could be anything I wanted to do or be when I grew up if I had the right attitude and put in the work. right? I really believe it's, if you put in the work, have the right perspective, you can accomplish pretty amazing things.
Same.
And he
Yep.
said, I could be anything I want when I grow up. And I'm like, yes, Hunter. He goes, do you still believe that to be true? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It's true. And then he said, why can't you? Like, why can't you build and design an adulthood that you want to be living?
Mm.
And in that moment, I just had this kind of pause where I recognized the illusion of security that I put in the job, that it was coming at the cost of my well-being, but because I had a pension and I had benefits and it was secure, and this had been my dream job. So I'm supposed to be happy here, right? I worked so hard from a high school dropout to somebody working at the university. Like, I traveled a lot of distance to get there. And then to have that moment when I realized that the cost of it was more than I was willing to pay, because it was impacting my family and my health. So again, awareness comes in different places, in different seasons. And I'm very much appreciative of I think our children are sometimes our greatest teachers,
Hmm.
and they're pretty good at pointing out our blind spots.
I love that advice. Sounds like Hunter needs his own podcast. And
You are not the first person to say that. Let me tell you. Yes, he definitely has some pretty interesting perspectives as he sees the world.
that's so funny. And I forgot we both have kids named Hunter, but mine's a little
Yes,
girl and yours a little
yes,
boy.
little boy.
Both of them should have their own podcast for what it's worth. But you're right. It's sometimes that self-awareness gets reflected back onto us, right? So
Yes,
it's not from within. It's a mirror
that's right.
that we get to look in and see exactly. And those words from the mouth of babes, right? Telling us
That's right.
exactly. And even something that I've been more conscious of when I'm speaking to my children in terms of saying, well, I have to do this and then I have to, instead of saying, you know, I get to do this or I'm
Right.
going to do this. Because again, if I'm dividing my time or taking time away from doing something I want to do with my child, and instead I'm doing something that appears I don't really want to do, and I'm prioritizing something that doesn't
Mhm.
have value over something that should, that's a mixed message for a kid to pick up on, right? Oh, so you really don't want to do that. It makes you miserable. So you'd rather do that than spend time with me or do this thing with me. That's, I think it's a little bit harder for them to digest. And I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I'm super mindful in terms of if I'm doing something that takes me away from them, which is inevitable. We have to
Yes.
sometimes.
Yeah.
That they understand that it's important and why
Yeah.
it's important, and that yes, nothing's more important than them, but sometimes we have to prioritize accordingly. Um,
Absolutely. And again, it ties back to that piece, but you flagged about that communication piece. I think so often we're on autopilot. We're just
yes,
going through the motions. We're not taking the time to have those critical conversations to let people know that, yes, this is, my preference would be to do this, but I also want to make sure that you have a really fantastic lifestyle and a
yes,
livelihood. And this is how we
yeah.
kind of build those things so they can go hand in hand. And again, bringing them into the conversation in an age appropriate way, I think is important, and reflecting back on, as I said, my children are older now, olderish now. I love the fact that they love the fact that their mom worked.
Yes.
Right. There's no hang ups of, I wish you would have been home, making organic baby food, mom, because I think my life would have been a lot better if I would have had organic baby food. Like my kids never,
No.
they aren't like that. They love the fact that their mom's capable. And, I do have these moments every once in a while where, just a wee while ago, all of them are home now. Two of them are off in university. So they're all home right now, and they were all going out. And then there was this pause, and they were like, Mom, you're going to be home alone. Are you okay? And it's like, literally half my time I'm traveling around this planet, traveling alone, doing my, stick handling, all these things. But they have these kind of moments. They're like, you can hang out by yourself, right? You're good. It's like, yeah, I'm very good. And I don't want them to ever feel that I'm not good, hanging out at home. Right. So it's just kind of interesting how there are these, again, ebbs and flows and these opportunities that come when we model for our young people what it's like to be able to support yourselves and support your family.
Yeah, this comes up often in talking to people who are entrepreneurs or even people who maybe have a better lifestyle than what they had as children, and how to manage that with their
Yes.
children. So how to show your kid, yes, the value of hard work, and that, you have to make money to do all these great things we do as a family. And how do you communicate that, and how do you find it? But I think to your point, it's this idea of showing them that, a purpose driven, a happy, fulfilled mom or parent,
Yeah.
regardless if you're making lots of money or little money, but if you're happy doing what you're doing every day, and you are showing your kids that, to your point, you can live a fulfilled life by doing what you love, I think there's absolute merit in that. I think the flip side is where it gets dangerous, is if, to your point, you're miserable not
Yes.
enjoying what you're doing and trying to explain, how do you reconcile that with your kids when they see you unhappy and that the price you have to pay for this life is misery and
Yeah.
stress and not really being around. It's a tricky one. I think it's so much easier said than done.
Mhm.
We work so hard to give our kids things that we didn't have, but then we're like, is the reason why I work so hard because I didn't have those things? So
Yeah.
how do I instill that same value system and drive in my kids if I'm handing them a lot of things that I had to work for? So it's always that tough thing. But I do think in the end, seeing a fulfilled, happy, driven parent in whatever capacity, whatever career, I think really matters. I think that's the message you want to send in terms of
Absolutely.
fulfillment for your children.
Yes, and interestingly, in the research, we actually know one of the greatest predictors of a child's resiliency is the well-being of the mother. So when we look across the, again, research in many different settings, many different challenges and obstacles that families are stick handling, the number one predictor of a child's resiliency is going to be the health of the primary parent. So as long as primary parent is grounded, well resourced, supported, the reality is those kids are going to do very well. And so I think sometimes it's interesting because this reminds me, a wee while ago, I was on a flight and, they were doing the safety demonstration. I'm sure you've probably heard that example of,
Mm-hmm.
you put your oxygen mask on first. And
Yes.
I happened to be sitting next to a pilot. He was doing a deadhead flight back to where we were going. And he said to me, we were chatting just briefly, and he asked me a couple questions about psychology. And because, of course, it's like, what do you do? Right. And it's like, this is, what I get to do. And so he asked me a couple questions about his teenager. And then I thought it was a window where I'm like, okay, well, you just asked me some professional questions. I'm going to, in exchange, ask you some professional questions. And I said to the gentleman, I said, I've always wanted to ask this question to a pilot. I said, how long do you have to put on your oxygen mask if this is a depressurized aircraft? Because
Ooh.
as a mother of three children, I cannot tell you with any certainty that I would put it on myself first. Like there was just no way. If I had my three babies, especially when they were little, and I was traveling with them as a solo parent, which I often did, I can't tell you with confidence I would have not like put it on one of them first.
Yes.
And the pilot said to me, as a parent, he understood, and he said, seconds.
Seconds.
You have seconds. If this is a depressurized aircraft, he said, you have seconds.
Oh my
And
goodness.
ever since that kind of exchange, it's this idea that, and knowing the research that when mom is okay, the primary parent is okay, the children have the best opportunity to be okay as well. It reinforced in me the importance of us looking after ourselves, and it's not selfish to put our
Mm.
needs ahead of others. We don't want to put needs of our family to the point where it's at our detriment, because ultimately we're not doing them a service in the grand scheme of things.
Whew, that is very powerful. And I do think that gets lost sometimes, right? In
Mhm.
terms of what we deem as being selfish versus
Yeah.
essential in order to show up for our kids. And, this is funny because I was reading something a little while ago about self esteem
Mhm.
and how in any exchange with your child, or any scenario, there's like a finite amount of self esteem to be gained, either
Yeah.
by the child or the parent.
Mhm.
So, as a parent, if you come in and fix this problem for your child and don't allow them to flex their, problem solving, skills or their resiliency skills, but you as a parent swoop in and save them and do a great thing as a parent, you rob them of that opportunity to build
Yes.
self esteem. Whereas on the flip side, if you maybe don't swoop in and do the tough thing, which is kind of sitting back and letting them figure it out and letting them kind of struggle through it, that they will eventually get to a place where hopefully they will gain that self esteem in themselves. But you as a parent get the delayed kind of self esteem. It's not the kind of immediate self esteem that sometimes that hit that we're looking for in that moment to be like, I'm a great parent. I did this.
Yeah.
You're looking for that delayed hit. And then this parlays into, you know, in that moment, sometimes the things that we think are selfish are actually things like, self-care and taking care of ourselves to better show up and to be fulfilled. That, sometimes solving all of our kids' problems is actually not the thing that best serves them. Taking care of ourselves so we can set an example and we can be there
Yes.
when they need them. That's actually the thing that might actually better serve them, which is almost counterintuitive because I think it has a lag effect where
Yes.
maybe we don't see it in the moment, but the children will certainly feel it later,
Yeah.
which is deep. But I hopefully
Yeah.
people understand what we're
Yeah, I
saying,
totally
right?
get that. Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
tough
And we talk
trade-off.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this idea about being a supporter versus a rescuer. And
Yes.
so often we want to rescue, and you've probably heard the example before of, like the helicopter parent. And what we see now is we often refer to as like the lawnmower parent, where before they would swoop into rescue. Now they're getting out ahead of the situation
Oh God.
and like creating this perfect, pristine path. So the example of, let's say you hear that your child who's starting school in September, that maybe they have a difficult teacher, you hear it from the grapevine. So then you go in and get your child switched before they ever are in that class with that difficult teacher. So they don't even know that difficult teachers exist in their little world, versus a child comes home and is able to articulate like, oh, I'm struggling, or I'm not,
Mm.
I'm not meshing with this teacher, there's something going on. And then you have this opportunity to build some skill sets. You're actually, again, rescuing them to the point where they don't even actually develop some of the age appropriate problem solving that we would want them to see. So we talk about that as rescuing and supporting. And of course, we're not going to put our children in danger. And I don't believe children have to go through terrible experiences to
No.
be able to build resiliency. One of the things that we know when we talk about self-esteem, one of the greatest ways, especially as grown-ups, to build our self-esteem is to be a person who does what they say they're going to do.
Yes.
So if I'm somebody who says, tomorrow morning, my non-negotiable, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to start my day outdoors for a 30-minute walk, it's non-negotiable. And then I wake up and then start to negotiate with myself about whether or not I'm going to do it. We actually know that starts to impact and impair our sense of agency, our sense of self-confidence, or even in that kind of case, self-stewardship, that I'm able to do the things I know I need to do to look after myself. So I think there's a really important piece there. And I can share with you just briefly. I remember a wee while ago, somebody asked me on a podcast, they said, oh, Robyne, what's your morning routine? Like, what do you do kind of in the morning? Because everyone loves to talk about morning routines
Mhm.
with high performance. So, or so I shared it with them. And the person said to me, wow, do you not feel guilty for taking that time for yourself first thing in the morning? And I said, no, I feel guilty if I like yell at my kids. Right? Like I feel guilty if I don't do the things
Mhm.
that I know help me feel grounded and well resourced. If I skip those things and then end up, impacting my relationships because I'm really testy, or I'm feeling, really dysregulated. That's when I feel guilty. I don't feel guilty for doing the things that I know make me a better parent.
Yeah, that's a kind of a mountain that I don't really climb anymore. That
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, it
Yeah.
shows up every once in a while. There's definitely
Absolutely.
moments, and I feel like as your kids are young, I don't know, I felt like I could get away with it more. But when your kids actually say, "What? You're doing that instead of staying home with me? Where are you
Yeah.
going?" And they can actually vocalize and say, and then
Yeah.
maybe they grow out of it when they get older. I don't know. You might know better than me,
Yeah.
but the guilt thing, because I have tested that theory so many times that I see that when I invest in myself, I show up better. Like I show up, like, I
Totally.
might say like I'm a good parent for 4 hours a day without
Yeah.
investing in myself, but then I can
Yeah.
stretch that to a good 5,
Yeah.
6, 7, 8 hours if I do the things. And my kids see me doing those things. So then
That's
they
right.
prioritize it and they pick up, right? It's that expression, it's what's caught, not taught. I'm
That's
going to have
right.
a hard time teaching my kids good habits, good morning routines, exercising, eating well, mindfulness. Choose your things that matter to you in terms of investing yourself. It's going to be really hard to prioritize that and teach that to my kids if they don't see me doing it. So the guilt
Absolutely.
thing definitely still pops up, but that's not one of them because I have seen the results of
Yes.
what investing in myself does for me, my family, my community, my work, my clients, everybody. I can just be better and do better when I invest more.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. And, it's interesting you're saying that kind of piece about, it ties into that notion of like, just do what I say, not necessarily what I do. And
Mhm.
recently I was working with a very, very large group of educators, and they went off a wee bit on like teenagers and cell phones, right? Like this seemed to be this,
Right.
big issue that they wanted to, really spend some time on, and how it's impacting mental health. And it is. There's absolute research that there is a correlation between screen time and emotional well-being in children and adolescents. However, the question that was asked of me was like, how do we get these kids off their phones? And I paused and I said to this educator, I said, on average, an adult looks at their phone 262 times a day. Start there.
Yeah, and apparently they can't go to the washroom without it either.
Exactly.
So that might be a
Absolutely.
bigger problem.
Oh, exactly, on so many levels. But just that kind of, and it
Yeah.
wasn't well received, like, in full disclosure, I was being a
Oops.
wee bit I was being a wee bit too cheeky for this environment, I think. But I said, we as grown-ups, 262 time is the average that we're looking at our phones. That's being modeled. That's
Mhm.
being modeled, that these are becoming devices that are essentially ruling our lived experience. And something that I've learned about myself, again, in that kind of tying back to that self-awareness and our resiliency, is that if I look at days that I am able to wake up with an alarm clock, like I mean, like that little $10 Amazon AA battery, nothing
Yep.
fancy alarm clock, and I'm able to like get outside and go for my walk, spend times with my family, grab a coffee, time walk my dogs. If I can do those things before I ever pick up a cell phone and even start to tether myself to my work, I have a remarkably different day.
Yeah.
My day is completely different. If I start my day in any vicinity of a cell phone, it derails my day. And then I spend the rest of the morning playing catch up, trying to get myself back on task, get myself back in a place of flow, getting back in a place of feeling resourced. So, again, I think it's so important that we establish practices that work for us. And
Yep.
then it's the commitment of doing it consistently. And then when we get to share that with our loved ones and our families, they get to reap the rewards too.
And the rewards are exponential. I mean,
Yes.
the more you do it, the easier it gets. And
Mhm.
the easier it gets, the more beneficial it is, the more impact that it has. It really is exponential. And I encourage people all the time to figure out those boundaries around their phones. And
Yes.
I tell people all the time, it still has a phone feature where if there's an emergency, someone will probably call you. Like if there's
Yes.
an emergency, I'm probably not going to text you,
Yeah.
from the back of an ambulance. I'm probably going to call you. So
Yeah.
it's just, and I use those analogies for clients and business too, right? It's like this expectation of a high performing executive that should be emailing 20. Well, I'm like, where is that in your job description?
Mhm.
And why can't you be the person that redefines what being an executive and a high performance person means? And in fact, I would argue that that type of behavior is infecting your performance. It's not
Oh,
enhancing
without a
it,
doubt.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
it's a little bit counterintuitive to think that that's going to make things better. I'm looking at the clock. You're a busy lady. I know you have to go, but I'm having you back for part two. So people don't be
100%.
disappointed. There's so much more we were going to talk about. This is just the teaser, but I'm going to ask you some questions rapid fire
Love
style
it.
because we'll just get as much information as we can out there. Um, One piece of advice, Stress Wisely, your book, one piece of advice on how people could live with more resiliency.
I love this question. Slow down.
Mm,
Just slow down. Talk slower, walk slower, be where your feet are. Just slow down. This is not a race. And when we are well resourced and something happens to us and we have energy, it looks like, you know what? I can figure this out. If I'm constantly running on empty and I'm depleted and there's another stressor, that could be the one that knocks me off my course, that knocks me off track. So when we slow down, slow becomes smooth, smooth becomes fast, we'll accomplish all the things we want to do, but in a well way.
ooh, I like that. That's so hard for me, but I'm going to try.
Yeah.
um, Leadership. You are a leader, in my opinion. You speak to leaders all over the world. You give amazing talks. What is the best piece of leadership advice that maybe you've received or given?
Let the junior person speak first.
Ooh,
Whenever you're at a table, in a meeting, in a situation, whoever is the most junior in the room, let them speak first because it's setting them up for the opportunity to share their ideas and their input, because otherwise you're going to get surrounded by people who just agree with you if you're the leader and you go first.
oh, I like that.
Mm.
You're a mom of 3 kids. You've mentioned them
Yes.
several times, but
Yeah.
what do you think is the best piece of parenting advice, again, that you've received or given as it relates to raising resilient children?
Connect before you correct. So before I
Mm.
give any corrections or feedback to any of my children, I make sure to check in with them. Because let's say I come home and the dishwasher isn't emptied and I lead with that. And all of a sudden later on I find out that they had a terrible, no good, rotten day at school. I'm missing the things that matter most. So connect before you correct.
Connect before you correct. I like that. What type of advice would you go back and give your younger self?
This is so interesting because it almost feels like a wee bit like ironic, but like Alanis Morissette, not really ironic, is learn to quit sooner. And
Mm.
I mistakenly stayed in situations, jobs, relationships, kind of where I goals longer than I should have in the name of loyalty. And one of the things in hindsight, I wish I would have learned to walk away sooner.
I love that. And I think even in the spirit of high performance, people think that this idea of pushing through and sticking to it and enduring the tough stuff is always the way, but sometimes quitting, pivoting, and starting over is the better way. And we
Yes.
need to accept that as part of our vernacular as high performance individuals as well.
Agreed.
We have a common love of coffee.
We sure do.
What is your go-to coffee order? How do you take your coffee?
Yeah, so my coffee order is just a tall latte with an extra shot, and that's it for the day. That's my favorite. It's my go-to. And I used to feel so like, oh my gosh, that's like 3 shots of espresso. That's just
Yes.
wild. But then I found out that Pedro Pascal has 6 shots
Oh
in
God.
his coffee. So I'm like, oh, I'm half, so I still have room to grow. But yeah, so my little tall coffee in the morning, or when I'm home, it's just my good old Keurig, and it's my go-to. Nothing sweet, just plain, but it brings me deep amount of joy. And I can share with you one time, not that long ago, I got to present to Keurig, to their organization, and I
Amazing.
felt like it was like a moment of like, you have served me
Yeah.
so well. I can't believe I get to serve you back, and the fact that it's also Dr. Pepper, which is my Diet Dr. Pepper is like literally like my celebration drink. So Keurig and Dr. Pepper's, that was joy right there
That's
in a cup.
amazing. Which
Joy in a cup.
just you have to speak for Nike because you have all the sweet kicks too. I
I
mean,
do. There you go. A
that's
few
going to be
bucks.
your next one. We're putting it out to the universe. Nike's going to
There you
call you,
go.
and what pair will you wear though? Oh, the stress. The
Oh,
stress.
I couldn't. Well, I can even tell you the pair I would wear would be, I got just gifted the most beautiful pair of Air Forces by a
Oh my
dear
goodness.
friend Kim, in the spirit of my new book coming out about hope. And I got a branded pair of Hope Air Force Ones. So I would wear Kim's Air Force Ones,
Perfect.
is that she gifted me
We'll
for my
get them
birthday.
ready because the
I'll
phone
get
call
them
from
ready.
Nike is coming.
Let's do it.
So you have your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast. Tell us about the book, and where else can people find you?
So the best way to find me is on social media at Dr. Robyne with an E. And yeah, there's 2 books out there in the world right now: Stress Wisely, How to Be
Mm.
Well in an Unwell World, where you can get at any of your favorite bookstores, and Calm Within the Storm, A Pathway to Everyday Resiliency, also available wherever you get your books. And the podcast, this is just fun. This is called
Mhm.
Resiliency Redefined. It's just a quick grab and go 20 minutes talking about big ideas in this realm of resiliency. And it's informal, but hopefully very useful.
Speaking of very useful, you are immensely valuable to this world. You're so full of
Thank you.
information. You're so relatable, so resourceful. And I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. We're going to have you back because this was just not enough time to get all the information out of your brain and out into the world. Promise me you'll come back. We'll do a part 2. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Robyne. I so appreciate you.
Thank you for all that you do in the invitation. I'll definitely be back.
Sounds good. We'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.